The routine inspection shattered when the colonel saw her tattoo. He went ghost white, not with anger, but with impossible recognition. It was the same symbol they'd buried with his best soldier. The air at Naval Air Station Coronado tasted of salt and hot metal. Gulls cried overhead, their calls a sharp counterpoint to the low hum of machinery inside the sprawling motor pool hangar. Here, amidst the organized chaos of hydraulics and steel, Elara Eli Vance was a ghost. Her movements were fluid and economical, a wrench turning with the silent precision of a surgeon's scalpel inside the exposed engine block of a joint light tactical vehicle. Grease streaked her forearms, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense knot. For 2 years, this had been her world, predictable, mechanical, and blissfully silent. Machines didn't ask questions. The other mechanics knew her as Eli, the quiet one who could diagnose a failing transmission by its whisper or coax a dead engine back to life with what seemed like sheer willpower. They respected her skill but kept their distance. There was an invisible wall around her, built of quiet efficiency and eyes that saw a little too much. The clatter of a dropped tool was followed by a voice, too loud, too close. "Damn, Vance. That's some serious ink." Specialist Leo Gator Martinez leaned over the engine block, his grin wide and unwelcome. He was new, fresh from training, and carried his bravado like a new piece of kit. His eyes were fixed on her left forearm, where a stylized black wolf skull, a single, spectral feather floating behind its ear, was visible just below her rolled-up sleeve. "You get that in a back alley shop or a prison?" Gator chuckled, a few of the other new recruits snickering behind him. Eli didn't look up. Her focus remained on a stubborn bolt. "It's functional," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The bolt gave way with a satisfying click. Gator's grin widened. He wiped his greasy hand on his coveralls and reached across the engine. "Functional, huh? What's it do?" "Ward off bad luck." His fingers were inches from her skin. She moved, not a flinch, but a deliberate, fractional shift of her weight, pulling her arm just out of his reach. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, finally lifted to meet his. They were cold, empty, and for a split second, Gator felt like he was looking at something ancient and dangerous. The laughter died in his throat. "Specialist Martinez." The voice cut through the hangar's noise like a razor. Master Gunnery Sergeant Gunny Harding stood 20 feet away, a clipboard in his hand but his gaze locked on the scene. Harding was a base fixture, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and old leather. "You have a problem with Specialist Vance's gear?" Gunny asked, his tone dangerously calm. "No, Gunny. Just admiring her tattoo," Gator stammered, straightening up. Gunny's eyes narrowed. He took a slow step forward. "Then you'll admire it from a distance. And you'll stop asking questions about things that are several pay grades above your security clearance. Is that understood?" "Crystal, Gunny." The small crowd of recruits dispersed, suddenly finding urgent tasks elsewhere. Gator mumbled an apology and retreated. Eli gave Gunny a barely perceptible nod of thanks. He nodded back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the wolf skull for a moment longer than necessary. He knew. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was something to be left alone. Eli went back to her work, the familiar rhythm of the wrench a welcome shield. But the quiet had been broken. A ghost had been seen. Colonel Marcus Thorne moved through the motor pool like a storm front, his presence sucking the idle chatter out of the air. His boots struck the concrete with crisp, rhythmic authority. He was a man defined by straight lines and sharp angles, from his jaw to the creases in his uniform. A routine inspection was just that, routine. A box to be checked. He wasn't supposed to stop. But he did. His eyes, scanning the rows of vehicles and personnel, snagged on a figure half submerged in the guts of a disabled transport. Eli Vance. Sleeves rolled, wrench moving with practiced ease. The harsh Californian sun sliced through a high window, illuminating the dust motes in the air and the mark on her skin. Thorne stopped dead. The world kept moving, a forklift beeped, a radio crackled, but his world had ground to a halt. Because what he saw wasn't just ink. It was a ghost story etched in flesh. A black wolf skull. A single spectral feather. A symbol seared into his memory from a mission that had been scrubbed from official records, a mission that ended in fire and a line of empty coffins. His voice was a low rumble. Gunny. Harding materialized at his elbow. Sir. That mechanic, Thorne said, his gaze never leaving Eli. Who is she? Vance, sir. Elara Vance. Top-tier mechanic. Quiet. A real artist with an engine. Vance, Thorne said, the name a strange weight on his tongue. The clanking of the wrench stopped. Eli slid out from under the vehicle, her movements clean and precise, wiping her hands on a rag. She stood and faced him, not with the ramrod posture of a subordinate being addressed, but with the stillness of a predator that has just scented another. The tattoo was in full view now, catching the light. Their eyes met across the hangar floor, and a current of impossible recognition crackled between them. Thorne took a step forward, then another. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply reached for the front of his own immaculate uniform. The other mechanics froze, watching in stunned silence. With slow, deliberate movements, he unbuttoned his jacket. Then his shirt. One button, then the next, his actions heavy with a significance no one else could comprehend. Gasps rippled through the hangar as he pulled the fabric aside, exposing the pale skin of his chest. And there it was. Identical. The same coiled wolf, the same spectral feather. But next to his, an old, puckered scar sliced through the ink, a permanent reminder of the price of survival. His voice was a choked whisper, meant only for Gunny but heard by the silence of the entire room. She's not logistics, he breathed, his hand hovering over his own chest as if touching a phantom limb. That's Ghost Wolf Alpha. The door to SCAF Delta 7 hissed shut, sealing them in a world of sterile silence. The sensitive compartmented information facility was a box of secrets, chilled to a constant 68 degrees, the only sound the low, almost subliminal hum of servers processing classified data. Eli stood in the center of the room, the scent of grease and metal on her clothes an alien presence in this sanitized environment. Colonel Thorne stood at the far end of a polished steel table, his back to her, staring at a blank, wall-mounted monitor. He looked older than he had in the hangar, the weight of the past 2 years pressing down on his shoulders. I signed your death certificate, Eli, he said, his voice raw. The sound echoed slightly in the small, hard-surfaced room. I watched them fold the flag. I spoke at your memorial. That wasn't me, Colonel, she replied, her tone as cold and flat as the table between them. That was a file number that needed to be closed. He turned, and she could see the storm of guilt and disbelief in his eyes. He had buried a ghost, only to find it fixing engines in his own motor pool. He slid a heavy manila folder across the table. It was sealed with a black wax stamp, devoid of any insignia. Operation Cinder Quill, he said. They told us the second transport went down in the ravine. No survivors. Nothing to recover. There wasn't much left, Eli said evenly, her gaze fixed on the folder. She didn't reach for it. But someone pulled me from the fire. No name, no unit. Just a needle in my arm. I woke up 3 weeks later in a sterile room in a country I didn't recognize. New face in the mirror, new name on a dog tag. She paused, flexing her fingers. New fingerprints. Thorne's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching violently. They didn't just bury you. They erased you. He sank into a chair, the crisp uniform seeming to wilt around him. And you stayed quiet. You came here, of all places. My new identity came with a non-recall classification and a maintenance specialty, she explained. Buried in the system. The safest place to hide is sometimes the last place they'd ever look. I fix what's broken. It keeps my hands busy. The colonel looked like he wanted to punch the wall. The rage in his eyes was ancient, directed not at her, but at the unseen forces that had stolen one of his own. He slid a tablet across the table, its screen dark. We thought the ghosts were sleeping, Eli. We were wrong. His finger tapped the screen, and it flickered to life. The image on the tablet was grainy, captured from a high-altitude drone. It showed a crowded marketplace in a sun-scorched, war-torn city. Thorne zoomed in on a figure moving through the crowd, a woman with her head covered, her face mostly in shadow. The Badlands of Al-Mazrah. 2 days ago, Thorne said, his voice grim. An NSA algorithm flagged a biometric signature pinging off a satellite. A ghost signal. It shouldn't exist. He tapped another icon. A short, glitchy video began to play. It was AI restored, the pixels swimming and reforming as the program tried to build a face from fragmented data. For a split second, the woman turned her head toward a stall, and the image sharpened. The face was older, harder, but unmistakable. Eli's breath caught in her throat. It was a ghost she had mourned for 2 years. Anya, she whispered. Petty Officer Anya Nix Sharma, Thorne confirmed. Biometric match is 99.2%. She's alive. The silence in the SCIF was deafening. Eli stared at the frozen image of her teammate, a woman who had supposedly been vaporized in the same fire that had almost claimed her. The implications were staggering. They're not just watching the archives, Thorne continued, his voice low and intense. Someone is actively hunting survivors. They're using deepfake profiles and biometric spoofing to comb through global databases, looking for us. This isn't about covering up the past, Eli. This is about tying up loose ends. Who? Eli's voice was sharp, the mechanic replaced by the commander she used to be. We don't know. The inquiries are masked behind so many layers of corporate and intelligence cutouts, it's impossible to trace. They have a higher clearance than I do. Eli looked from the tablet back to Thorne. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They hadn't just survived. They had been scattered, hidden, and left vulnerable. Anya was the proof. They were no longer ghosts, they were liabilities. They think we're prey, Eli said, a dangerous light kindling in her eyes. She pushed the tablet back toward the colonel. Her decision was instant, forged in the fire of that forgotten ravine. The time for hiding was over. The time for fixing broken engines was done. Then we stop running, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound purpose. We become the bait. Thorne looked at her, seeing the alpha wolf emerge from the shell of the quiet mechanic. He gave a slow, grim nod. The hunt was on. But now, the hunter was about to become the hunted. The Gearjammer Cantina was an oasis of noise and greasy food, a place where off-duty personnel could shed their ranks for an hour. Eli sat alone at a small table in the corner, methodically eating a plate of fries, her posture relaxed. But her eyes were anything but. She was watching reflections. The convex security mirror above the door, the polished chrome of the napkin dispenser, the dark screen of her own phone lying flat on the table. She'd seen him 3 minutes ago. Civilian clothes, a faded baseball cap and a nondescript jacket, but his posture was too straight, his movements too economical. He wasn't eating. He was nursing a single cup of coffee, pretending to scroll through his phone. But Eli saw it in the reflection on her screen. His phone was angled just so, its camera lens pointed directly at her. He wasn't just watching, he was recording. Gunny Harding walked past her table with a tray, pausing for a fraction of a second. "Chilly in here today, Vance," he said, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward the man with the coffee. It was a warning. Eli gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The man's earpiece, a tiny flesh-colored bud, was barely visible. He tapped it twice. Protocol. He wasn't a lone wolf. He was a spotter. She finished her last fry, stood up, and dumped her tray. She walked out into the bright afternoon sun without a backward glance. She didn't need to look. In the reflection of the cantina's large window, she saw the man lift his phone to his ear. A call was being made. The net was closing. By the time she reached the motor pool, she had counted 4 potential surveillance points and logged 3 unfamiliar faces that didn't belong. Gunny was waiting for her by her empty workstation. Colonel Thorne. Now, he said quietly. He said to tell you it's a maintenance protocol review. The code was clear. The walk to SCIF Delta 7 felt different this time. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every corner a potential ambush. Inside, Thorne didn't waste time with greetings. He slid a sealed envelope across the steel table. The wax was the color of black obsidian, and pressed into it was not an insignia, but the smooth, anonymous impression of a fingertip. Directive Sunstone, Thorne said. It's not an order. It's a key. You decide if you want to turn it. Eli stared at the seal. The last time she'd seen one like it, 3 members of her team had walked into the desert and never returned. It was the authorization for a mission so deep, so deniable, that it officially never happened. Intel came in an hour ago, Thorne said. They've compiled a full dossier. On you. Your movements, your habits, your psychological evaluation from before Cinder Quill. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was preparation. They weren't just watching her, they were studying her, learning how to break her. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she felt was the ice-cold calm of certainty. The silence had to be broken. Her fingers closed around the envelope. The woman they called a mechanic was gone. The sterile light of the SCIF was unforgiving. Eli broke the obsidian seal on the envelope. Inside wasn't a mission brief, but a small, flat tin case. She opened it. Nestled in black foam was a single, sterile needle and a small vial of ink, the original, proprietary formula. Her ink. She walked to the far wall, where the light was brightest, and rolled up her sleeve. The faded wolf skull looked like a distant memory, a scar that had lost its voice. For 2 years, she had worn the disguise of a quiet life, the role of a woman content with wrenches and engine oil. That woman was a ghost. It was time to let her go. With a steady hand, she cleaned the skin. The oil and grime came away easily. Then, she dipped the needle into the dark liquid. The first prick of the needle was a shock, sharp and electric. It wasn't just reopening the tattoo, it was reopening the wound beneath it. She traced the old lines with painstaking precision. With each stroke, the wolf seemed to awaken. The faded gray turned to a stark, defiant black. The spectral feather shimmered with new life. This wasn't camouflage anymore. It was a declaration of war. Thorne watched in silence, his expression a mixture of awe and dread. He knew what this ritual meant. The return of Ghost Wolf Alpha was not a victory, it was a necessity born of desperation. You know what happens if they trace this mission back to you, he said finally, his voice heavy. Your name is still a ghost in the system. Officially, you don't exist. You'll have no cover. Eli didn't look up from her work, wiping a tiny bead of blood mixed with ink from the edge of the design. That's the point, Colonel. A ghost can't be court-martialed. She finished the final line, the wolf's eye now a piercing, intelligent void. The pain in her arm was a grounding force, a reminder of who she was. When this is over, Thorne asked, his voice softer now, do you want to disappear again? I can make it happen. A new life, a clean slate. For real this time. Eli paused. She capped the ink vial and carefully placed the needle back in its case. She looked at the raw, vivid tattoo on her arm, a symbol of a life she could never truly escape. Then she looked at Thorne. No, she said, her voice clear and steady. I want others to have the choice I never got. She pulled her sleeve down. The new ink was warm against her skin, a living thing. The mechanic was gone. The soldier was back. And the hunt had just begun. Elara's story is about more than just a hidden identity. It's a tribute to the silent warriors whose names are erased from the records but whose sacrifices are real. Their courage exists in the shadows, even when the official files are empty. What do you think gives someone the strength to become a living ghost for a cause they believe in? Share your thoughts below. If you know or respect a service member, take a moment to honor them in the comments. Please, comment with respect. And if you want to see more stories where the truth is brought to light, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.